It began with a deal that wasn't supposed to exist. In the quiet corridors of Ottawa's Defense Ministry, a handful of top officials met behind closed doors. No media, no public documents, not even whispers on the record. But someone had seen the files, and what they contained could change how the world viewed Canada's relationship with both the US and Sweden. For years, the world believed Canada's fighter jet future was tied to the American F-35 program. Billions were already set aside, contracts signed, and military officials proudly spoke of strengthening ties with our closest ally. But in the shadows, something else was happening. While the public narrative spoke of American technology and shared defense strategies, inside a restricted room, Canadian defense analysts were studying something. Scandinavian. It started with a simple question. Why were smaller nations outperforming their larger counterparts in aerial efficiency? Sweden's Gripen E had quietly been making headlines, not for being the most expensive, but for being the smartest, cheaper, adaptable, and engineered for independence. For Canadian engineers, that word, independence, meant more than performance. It meant control, something the F-35 deal would never truly offer. Unofficially, an internal study was launched, disguised under an unrelated name. Officially, it didn't exist. The task was simple. Compare operational costs and data integrity between the Gripen E and the F-35. But what they found was not what they expected. The Gripen, despite its lower cost, could integrate with Canada's existing systems without American oversight. It didn't require encrypted codes from Washington to function at full capacity. The more they learned, the more uneasy they became about what the F-35 truly represented. Late-night emails, encrypted messages, and private briefings between Canadian defense scientists and Swedish engineers followed. Everything had to remain hidden. Even a single leak could provoke diplomatic chaos. For months, technical data was exchanged under the radar, labeled as simulation metrics. But behind those numbers was something far more strategic. An alternate path for Canada's air defense future, one where Ottawa could finally act without permission from Washington. Then came the twist. A senior American liaison discovered discrepancies in Canada's procurement communications. Certain coded exchanges didn't match with known F-35 project identifiers. Quietly, a probe was launched, and within weeks, high-level officials in Washington were asking questions no one in Ottawa wanted to answer. By the time the rumors reached the press, it was already too late. Canada had been negotiating, not for more F-35s, but for access to classified Gripen systems. A secret memorandum, signed in a remote European facility, hinted at joint research opportunities between the Royal Canadian Air Force and Saab's Defense Division. To the outside world, it looked like a harmless collaboration. But those who read the fine print knew it was much more. The foundation of a secret fighter program hidden in plain sight. Inside Parliament, very few knew what was truly unfolding. A former intelligence analyst later claimed that certain Gripen components were being quietly tested on Canadian air bases under the codename Project Northwind. If true, it meant Canada had already started developing a hybrid air defense network, combining NATO protocols with Gripen technology, something completely outside US control. But as the pieces started fitting together, one man's sudden disappearance sent shockwaves through the defense community. A systems engineer who allegedly worked on Northwind vanished just days before he was scheduled to testify before a parliamentary committee. His apartment was found empty, his computer wiped, and his security badge missing. The official statement called it a personal matter. But insiders whispered a different story. That he knew too much about Canada's Secret Gripen Deal. And that's when the cover-up began to unravel. The cover-up began quietly. Documents vanished from archives, digital traces were erased, and officials denied everything. The missing engineer's name was redacted from internal reports. Even those who worked beside him were ordered not to discuss his status. But in the digital age, secrets never truly die. And soon, pieces of hidden data began surfacing. Fragments of encrypted emails, scanned blueprints, and one file labeled only as Aurora. Aurora wasn't just a code name. It was the operational alias for a secret Canadian-Swedish joint project. One meant to modify the Gripen E's systems for Arctic warfare. The plan was brilliant, yet dangerous. Create a version of the Gripen capable of surviving extreme polar conditions, optimized for long-range patrols and independent missions without US satellite guidance. A fighter made to defend the North, with no strings attached to Washington. For decades, Canada had depended on American technology to patrol its Arctic skies. Aurora would end that dependency forever, but not everyone was on board. Within NATO, whispers of Canadian deviation began to spread. Intelligence intercepts suggested that US defense contractors were furious, calling Ottawa's actions a betrayal in progress. Washington feared that if Canada successfully developed an independent fighter system, other nations might follow, shattering the F-35 monopoly. Behind closed doors, pressure mounted. American envoys met Canadian ministers in discreet settings, warning them of long-term diplomatic consequences. Still, a handful of senior officials refused to back down. They believed in Aurora. They believed Canada deserved technological sovereignty. Among them was a defense strategist, known only by his initials, DH. According to leaked cables, DH coordinated secret meetings in remote air bases across northern Canada, where experimental Gripen variants were tested under extreme winter conditions. These tests, conducted under the guise of joint exercises, were said to involve Swedish pilots flying side by side with Canadian air crews. Without any formal acknowledgement by either government, the data collected from these tests was astonishing. The Gripen E not only outperformed expectations, but also operated flawlessly in the freezing Arctic temperatures that crippled other fighters. Its modular systems allowed it to integrate with Canada's communication network seamlessly, something the F-35's encrypted systems never permitted. Reports stated that the Gripen could be refueled, armed, and redeployed in half the time, even in -30 degrees Celsius weather. It wasn't just efficient, it was revolutionary. But the deeper the project went, the more dangerous it became. One night, an unmarked aircraft entered Canadian airspace near the test zone. NORAD was alerted, but the response was muted, almost intentionally delayed. By the time radar confirmed its identity, the object had vanished. Some claimed it was a US reconnaissance drone, gathering intelligence on Aurora. Others believed it was something far worse, a deliberate act of intimidation. Shortly after that incident, the Canadian Prime Minister received a confidential report titled Strategic Vulnerability, Unauthorized Collaboration. It exposed partial details of Aurora, revealing just enough to force a response. Officially, Ottawa denied everything, but insiders reported a sudden wave of resignations across multiple defense departments. Files were shredded, access revoked, and funding temporarily suspended. But behind the smokescreen, the project wasn't dead. It had simply gone deeper underground. Sweden, too, denied any involvement. Saab's official statements described all Gripen activity as routine evaluations, yet satellite imagery told another story. In a restricted airfield north of Quebec, analysts spotted unfamiliar Gripen configurations, ones that didn't match any existing model. Some experts claimed these were prototypes equipped with experimental stealth modifications and Canadian avionics. The photographs were quietly taken down after they appeared online, but not before copies spread across encrypted defense forums. As months passed, journalists who tried to investigate faced unusual barriers. Sources withdrew at the last minute. Freedom of information requests were delayed indefinitely. One investigative reporter from Montreal even received a direct warning. A black envelope with no return address, containing only a printed message. "Stop digging. You're not supposed to see what's above the clouds." She disappeared from the public eye days later. The deeper one looked, the clearer the pattern became. Someone was pulling strings to keep Aurora buried. But every secret has a crack, and that crack came when an internal memo, accidentally forwarded to a civilian contractor, contained a chilling line. Gripen CER variant, ready for Phase 3 Arctic trials. Coordination with Swedish counterparts confirmed. The leak spread like wildfire through defense circles. Within hours, international media demanded answers. Ottawa remained silent. Washington was furious, and Sweden just smiled. Because by then, the world had already realized something extraordinary. Canada might have just built the first fighter in modern history capable of defying American control. But no one knew how far they'd go to protect that secret. By the time whispers of Aurora reached the international press, it was already too late. The operation had moved beyond secrecy. It had become survival. Behind the walls of an abandoned military facility in northern Manitoba, technicians worked day and night on what was now being called Phase 3. The goal: integrate an advanced data fusion core that could allow the Gripen CA to operate independently from NATO's centralized command systems. In essence, Canada was creating an autonomous fighter, one that answered to no one. The engineers knew the stakes. If discovered, the project wouldn't just cause political tension, it could fracture Canada's defense alliances. But those inside believed they were part of something greater: the creation of the first truly independent Western fighter jet in modern history. A machine not owned by superpowers, but by strategy, innovation, and necessity. Yet, as history often proves, freedom has a price. One cold February morning, a transport convoy carrying sensitive hardware to the Manitoba site vanished. The official report cited blizzard interference, but leaked data told another story. Satellite tracks showed an unidentified aircraft tailing the convoy moments before communications was lost. Days later, fragments of the missing crates were found, burned, twisted, and coated with a metallic residue. Someone had intercepted the shipment, and they wanted Aurora destroyed. Within hours, Swedish defense officials held an emergency call with Ottawa. Their words were careful but urgent. They know. No one said who they were, but everyone understood. US intelligence had found proof. Sources inside Washington claimed a classified Pentagon briefing referred to unauthorized modifications to foreign aerospace assets, language eerily consistent with the Gripen CA files. A diplomatic storm was forming, and Canada stood right at its center. The Prime Minister's office was divided. Some demanded the project's immediate shutdown to preserve US relations. Others argued that surrendering now would mean losing years of innovation, and Canada's last chance to be independent in aerial defense. The arguments grew heated. In one recorded exchange later leaked online, a defense aide was heard saying, "If we shut this down, we'll be a colony in the sky forever." That night, something extraordinary happened. Radar stations across the Canadian Arctic detected an unauthorized launch. One single aircraft lifting off from the Manitoba test range. The signal was faint, then vanished. NORAD scrambled to respond, but by the time they established visual contact, the object was gone. Rumors spread that the Gripen CA prototype had flown its first unapproved mission directly over the Arctic Circle and returned unseen. If true, it meant Aurora had succeeded. The aftermath was chaos. Washington demanded explanations. NATO allies called for transparency. And Ottawa went silent. The Prime Minister announced an internal review, but insiders revealed that Aurora's data servers had already been relocated overseas, somewhere in Scandinavia. Sweden neither confirmed nor denied receiving them. Days later, a mysterious video appeared on an encrypted military forum. It showed a snow-covered airstrip, a sleek aircraft bearing no national insignia, and a brief transmission in distorted audio. "This sky belongs to no one." The clip lasted only 12 seconds before disappearing. Analysts tried to verify it, but the source was untraceable. Still, many believed it was authentic, the first and only visual proof of the Gripen CA. As the months passed, talk of the secret deal faded. News outlets moved on, labeling it a conspiracy theory born from geopolitical tensions. But those who had seen the classified reports knew the truth. Aurora wasn't a rumor. It was a reality hidden behind layers of denial. And even if the jets had been dismantled or hidden away, their existence had already changed everything. For the first time in decades, Canada had broken the invisible chain of dependency that bound its skies to foreign control. Whether the world ever learns the full truth of the Gripen deal remains uncertain. But one thing is undeniable. The secret is no longer completely buried. Somewhere in the frozen expanse of the Arctic, under Aurora-lit skies, a lone aircraft still flies. It carries no flag, no emblem, no allegiance. Only the silent echo of those who built it in defiance of power. And when its engines roar across the night, even satellites hesitate to track it, because some truths are too dangerous to be recorded, and too powerful to be forgotten.